When you've played one of the most iconic roles in the history of daytime television for nearly 40 years, you and your character have an effect on millions of viewers every day. What you do with that privilege defines you. And Eric Braeden, known worldwide as Victor Newman on the Young and the Restless, realizes that responsibility. With his memoir, I'll Be Damned, we'll learn about a man who is committed to making the world a more loving place. Eric, I've already got 100 people that need the book signed before once they found out you were coming on the show. It's a thrill for me to have you here. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Barry, it was a long way down here, but it was worth it. You know, I've admired your show for a long, long time, I must tell you. And you are one of the few people on television that really listens to the authors. And I've admired that.
I'm not going to ask you any questions. What I find is when I read the material, it's your words that interest me the most. And it's your words when you write about your life in World War II as a young boy. Because, you know, we're always used to the perspective in this country of either the soldier of either side, but we're never from the perspective of a young child in Nazi Germany at the time. Or I'll phrase it the way you probably would like it better. In Germany at the time, that was ruled by the Nazis. I'm going to separate that because you still say that those moments haunt you to this day, and in a way, you've really done the best that you can to get away from the sins of the father, as they say, to show that, you know, people are good people in sometimes very bad situations.
What I would say, having thought about this whole thing for a long, long time, because it is so horrendous what happened during the period between 1933 and 45, it is very difficult to put one's head around all that and try to put it in perspective. But in order to deal with it, you need to put in perspective. In order to not become a revisionist and deny what happened, you need to be able to deal with the horror of that period. And I think I've done that by now. I think I put it in perspective. And what helps the most is to understand history.
You know, one of the things that enabled you to even, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, to even begin to understand, you found that sport was some way a discipline that could help put things in perspective and help you gain strength, do things. I even shared with you my stories about it, and that's so important. When I was reading how valuable that was to you as a way of shaping your life, I thought it was something that the viewers would truly relate to.
You must remember that in 1941, I was born in the city of Kiel, K-I-E-L, on the Baltic Sea. It was bombed first nightly, then day and night. 96% destroyed. One estimates that about 500,000 bombs were thrown over that city alone. I grew up with the sound of anti-aircraft and bombing alarms and being carried into the basement of our house every day, and then every day and night. And so there are certain visceral sounds that I still react to the day. After the war, the blight was extraordinary. And then my father was arrested, was denazified, and came back from that, and our immediate family went into destitution after that. And the only thing that saved me after he died when I was 12 was sports. The only thing I had to look forward to. The rest was hard work on farms in my village in order to make some kind of living. and the only bright spots, sports and girls. That's it.
For many men still today,
yes,
those are
today.
the bright spots.
That's right. To see a beautiful woman is wonderful. So, but sports, you know, most psychiatrists' couches would be empty if people knew what you and I know, that you get in the ring or you get on the sporting field, whatever it is, within 5 minutes, you don't think about yourself anymore.
That's right.
You really don't. You measure yourself against someone else or against, in my case, track and field, in discus and javelin shot put. How much farther can I throw? How can I improve my discus throw or my javelin throw or my times in the 400 meters? And it is the simplest, if you reduce it even to walking, the healthy effects of just that are extraordinary.
You know, in the book, there was something that I've been dealing with, and I thought, when I read it, I said, I always believe in this cosmic library. If I'm dealing with it, someone else is dealing with it. And I saw that you, and these are your exact words, I remember the exact moment when I felt rage for the first time. I've been having a little issues lately. I'm going to level with you and my viewers, and I've been feeling a bit more rage than I'm used to. And that's almost a shocking experience when you have it. There's a benefit to it because you know you have the adrenaline and the wherewithal if you need it to muster it up, but then there's almost a little fear that comes with it that it could overtake you.
And that is where sports comes in.
Yeah.
And that is where what you do, you have a heavy bag in your backyard. I still go to the gym sometimes and box and or work out and or lift weights, whatever it is, in order to contain that rage. You know, I venture to say that if most politicians learned how to deal on the sporting field, learned how to compete, were checked at one time or another by someone else, you learn respect for your fellow human beings when you're in the ring or on the soccer field, as I was with the Maccabees. You learn that anyone of any ethnic background, of any religious background, of any national background can beat you. So you learn respect for another human being. You don't immediately vilify a group of people because they belong to a certain ethnicity.
Well, you know, you mentioned even religion, and the Maccabees, again, talk about repayment. They are basically in Israel, they're the Maccabees. They are the Jewish team, the Jewish athletes that participate. There is a German from the Nazi period and on the Maccabees. That in itself, we could just have an entire conversation with. But what led me where I want to go is when you talked about whether the religious, no matter what social, economic, you can gain that respect. You say in the book, you're still even trying to find your own spiritual belief. To this day, you are searching. Now, I don't know if maybe the book is a few months older, maybe you found it between now and then, but the search, and you're still wondering, and I believe that the search must always be the search. I don't think it can be found. I think that's what faith, in a sense, means, constantly searching.
I have no difficulty with feeling moments of spirituality where you inevitably, when you ask questions as to where we are from, what this all means, I understand then the leap to religion. I understand that. Where I part ways with official religion, dogmatic religion, is when it becomes dogmatized, when it becomes written down, when it becomes ritualized. I disagree with that. Wholeheartedly. Can't stand it when I see evidence of that. There's one thing I learned growing up as a Christian, kind of, sort of, as a Protestant. What fascinated me was the notion of forgiveness and the notion of universal love. And I think all religions have that. That I understand. That I completely agree with and identify with. When that religion is used to differentiate yourself from others, that's when I've started having difficulties. I can't stand it. But the notion of universal love, the notion of forgiveness, is one that made a deep, deep impression on me, to the point where as a 14-year-old, after my father died, I was in a constant quest for the meaning of life and asked various people who were pastors, etc., and they could never give me sufficient answers. But I was very, very deeply impressed by Albert Schweitzer, who was a doctor, who took his work and his mission to Lambarene, Africa, and who gave to a leper colony. And that so impressed me. That to me was the essence of what Christ was about. If he existed, I guess he did. That impressed me, that notion of giving to people who have less than you do. That somehow appealed to me. That appeals to me about all religions. And where I have difficulty is when it becomes dogmatized and you differentiate yourself from others.
Now this almost takes on a whole new context after hearing this. You write about the craft of acting. I've always been attracted to complex characters, yes, flawed, dark, and conflicted, struggling to make the best hand with what they've been dealt. Yes. And then you later go on saying that you yourself struggle with those inner conflicts. And I sense that there's almost that same tie with what we're talking about when it comes to spirituality, is that we have to look at it much more in the complex manner than in this dogmatic way. And I think by the way you approach your character, and when I was watching Victor Newman this last month before I knew you were coming on, as I told you, you can see through the pores the complex issues constantly circulating in his mind. You can just see he's not one way, he's complex.
Whether it is noble in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, by opposing end them, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there is the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. Shakespeare has it all. Shakespeare asks all these questions. It's an ongoing quest. I recently found an old issue of New York Review of Books where they talked about the possibility of life after death, and from a point of view of surgeons and scientists, etc. What an eternally fascinating question. What does all this mean, Barry? What does this mean? And yet I've been here in this country since 1959, and I've seen progress. It is not all for naught. I've seen progress, primarily in regard to black and white. When I came to this country in 1959, the age of 18, took the Greyhound bus from New York to Galveston, Texas, through the entire South. And I saw all these signs, for colors only, for whites only. So, whoa. And began to get a dim notion of what that was all about. Utter, complete prejudice and exclusion of a part of Americans. And that has improved, whether you and I like it or not. In this town of Los Angeles, where you and I now sit in the suburbs thereof and discussing this book, I remember here in the 60s, there were certain clubs in town that did not accept Jews. The changes that I've seen give me hope for mankind. What America has done to establishing the Western Alliance. America has been the bedrock of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, been the bedrock of really the European Union, if you will, the bedrock of the International Monetary Fund, of all of the United Nations. America was the driving force behind the League of Nations after the First World War, out of which came the United Nations. if it had not been for these international alliances, we probably would have had many more serious conflicts than we do.
But because you're so contemplative of that, I guess I got some insight to another thing that you wrote about. You're torn between gratitude and depression. And sometimes that seems like, at first, a big thing to be torn about, yet I know that's what tears me apart oftentimes as well. You know that gratitude is the way of looking at life, and it really gets you out of depression, but yet there are things that happen in life that bring you into that fold. So that balance between them and being torn by it, I found a complex notion and something I wanted to explore further because it's what I deal with as well.
This is where sports come in. At the end of Voltaire's Candide, you can philosophize, you can sit with the brightest brains, you don't come to a satisfying conclusion after all of it. What satisfies me at a moments of perhaps reflecting and almost depression, but not really, I go out and do something. Do it, physically. That solves all problems. It is that simple. There's nothing more complex to it than that. If we allow ourselves to constantly ruminate about this and that, my goodness, listening all day to CNN or whatever, I mean, drives you nuts. Primarily nowadays. I mean, the plethora of news about stupid utterings and mutterings on Twitter by someone we know, it's just mind-boggling. You got to shut it off.
But I'll tell you something I must do. If I don't bring up Victor Newman and the Young and the Restless, 90% of the people watching this will only complain and tweet about me.
And
so,
you don't want that.
So I want to talk about that because here's a situation you were and still are, and this is what I found so fascinating when I was watching you. You are serious about your craft. I don't know if you take yourself seriously. You seem too good of a man to take yourself seriously. I think it's important to take one's work seriously and oneself very lightly. Yeah. So when you had this opportunity at first, and this is how I find things often happen, the opportunities that present themselves that oftentimes you think are going to turn out to be the worst. I always like to think of that Garth Brooks song where he goes, "Thank God for some unanswered prayers." Because here would be something that you never would have wanted. You practically refused it anyway. Was it Dale? Is that your wife? Am I correct? Who really helped you see the depth that you could have by exploring this character, Victor Newman.
She saw me come home from work sometimes after I started doing The Young and the Restless, and I was depressed by the enormous speed. Everything is so compacted into a short period of time. And I said, what is this all about? And then she said something very simply. She says, why don't you simply embrace it and use it as a challenge? In other words, use it as a challenge to do as good of work as possible within that short period of time. Let me give you an example. Nighttime series, of which I did many. We shoot between 8 and 12 pages a day of a script. Titanic, on which I worked, did about 2 pages a day. We now shoot 120 pages a day on Y&R. Do you know what that means?
Oh, I know what it means to just try to read that many pages, let alone shoot it.
You cram dialogue into your head, and then you try to make it real. Because one thing that has always attracted me to this medium is to express what one really feels.
And I think these words will relate to my viewers because it has nothing even to do with the craft, but yet it comes out of that. Your words. Sometimes a seemingly negative experience can have a positive outcome. I think if you keep your eyes open, I found, and I wish it wasn't this way, I'm telling you, it's like, it's not a flag-bearing thing that I want to say, but gosh darn it, almost everything really good that has happened to me has come out of some negative experience at some time.
But Barry, I think that's the essence of the human quest, is to go through hard times, to go through negative stuff, to arrive at something more positive that we can embrace. I think it's the nature of nature. The nature of nature is conflict, stress and conflict. Out of that comes something positive. It's the dialectic of life. And I think the more we embrace that, the more we accept it. I learned, doing what I'm doing, that with all the conflicts you have on the set about trying to redo a scene or rewrite a scene or not being satisfied with this or that, out of it comes a moment when you say, that was real, that feels good. And then when you go out into the audience, anywhere in the world where the show plays, and you find people who respond to what you have done, that is such feeling of deep satisfaction. You say, you know something, what I do does make a difference. And that is really what this is all about. What you do makes a difference. People read because of you. People listen, and they say, oh, let me read that. You're a very wise man. You've obviously dealt with a lot of great intellects, a lot of great writers, and you have, I think, extrapolated the right lessons. But when you have your audience response, or my audience response to what I do, wherever I am, in Harlem, in 70th and Hoover, the old boxing gym in downtown LA, or near the White House, or Monte Carlo with the Prince of Monaco, they all watch this damn thing. And you say, wow. So I do have an effect. We all want to know that we mean something to people around us.
And the great irony is that all people do, and they don't oftentimes get to feel it.
Right. I think what is, in a microcosmic way, vitally important, that once a day or whatever, you have a moment of a kind exchange with someone. If that just means a hello and a smile and say, hey man, how are you doing? That is what is important. It is not the relationship to authority, it's the relationship to another human being. That is important, and that we so often forget.
And also to be that same relationship to yourself. Be a little kinder to yourself.
That, I think, is arguably one of the most difficult things to learn.
Oh,
you know,
I'm still going to talk about seeking. Yeah. That is the most difficult thing to learn.
There's a moment where you sit back and say, you know, the other day I sat in my backyard and I said, this is so beautiful. And I sat there and I tweeted to my fans and I said, I'm deeply grateful. And to the audience, to those who react to what I've done, to those people who have been kind to me. There have been many, many. When you become an immigrant in a country, you encounter a lot of people who've been very helpful and very nice. And you must not forget that.
I personally am so grateful that you, Mr. Braedon, graced our stage. Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure.
Very much. It is my pleasure. I want to leave with a few words before I go, and then I'll come back to something in a moment. But I want to end, before we even get to my close, with these words that you wrote. Maybe as long as there are human beings, there will be conflict. But what a shame for us to expect so little of ourselves and not hold ourselves to a higher standard. And isn't that what you just meant by that forgiveness?
Yes, exactly.
Well, Victor.
Exactly.
Eric, you have set us on a higher standard. Thank you again, sir, so very much. It's a pleasure. And thank you for joining us. Now, before we go, I'd like to leave you with these few more words by Eric Braedon from I'll Be Damned. Ultimately, I believe that underneath it all, underneath a lot of cultivated, superficial assumptions based on nothing meaningful whatsoever, most of us have a great deal in common. I'm Barry Kibrick. Seek the wisdom between all the superficial assumptions, and I'll be damned if you don't see that the vast majority of us really do have something in common. Thank you, sir, so very much.
It was a pleasure.
My pleasure.
To connect with Barry, like him on Facebook and follow him on Twitter at Barry Kibrick. And to contact Barry directly, view past episodes of Between the Lines, and read his weekly blog, visit us at barrykibrick.com. Between the Lines with Barry Kibrick is made possible in part by Sam Ash Music, a proud sponsor of Between the Lines with Barry Kibrick. Sam Ash has been serving musicians since 1924. To unlock your inner musician, information is available at samash.com.